This story starts in a small town called Brightburn, Kansas, where Kyle and Tori are in bed. Suddenly, the quiet and peaceful night is disturbed by a low rumbling sound. Tori senses something strange and pauses for a moment. Few moments later, a powerful crash shakes their entire house. Alarmed, they rush to the window, and a glowing red lightly shining brightly in the nearby woods stuns them. Concerned, the couple heads towards the site of the crash to find out what went down. A spaceship is found at the mysterious crash site with a baby boy inside it. Seeing the baby, they decide to keep him with themselves and raise him as their own kid. The kid is named Brandon, and their lives are never the same from that night onwards. 10 years later, Tori heads to Brandon's room to get him ready for school in the morning, but finds his room empty. As hide and seek is a game they often play with each other, Tori assumes that Brandon is hiding, so she whistles to signal him. A distant whistle is heard as an answer, and she follows in that direction. Following the whistle sound, she makes her way to their barn, looking around the hay bales and corners. She tries to locate Brandon. Everything is quiet in the barn, and she is unable to locate him, but Brandon suddenly jump scares her, and Tori reacts with a mix of amusement and relief. They step outside the barn, where Kyle is waiting, and he gently reminds Brandon to keep out of the barn, as it can be dangerous. At school, Brandon is asked to answer a question about bees and wasps. He answers confidently, explaining about the pollination by bees and wasps being predators. He also shares a detailed example of a specific wasp species, Polistus sulcifer, which no longer builds its own nests and instead relies on other species to raise its young ones. While this answer is accurate, his classmates find it unusual. One boy, Royce, teases Brandon for sharing too much detail, and most of the class joins in laughing at Brandon, except one girl, Caitlin, a kind classmate. She tries to reassure Brandon, and the two exchange a brief but understanding smile. Later that night at home, Tori checks up on Brandon before heading towards her painting room. As she begins to paint, a faint red light begins to pulsate from within the barn. At the same time, Brandon starts having seizures while sleeping. Tori hears a noise, but doesn't realize what's happening, and eventually returns to painting when the noise quiets down. A short while later, Brandon wakes up and climbs out of his room's window, and Tori hears a loud thud coming from outside and steps out to check. Things seem normal outside at first, but then Tori senses something behind her. As she turns, a figure runs past her, and she chases it through the backyard. Moving through the hanging laundry outside, she notices a brief glimpse of Brandon's back before he disappears into the darkness of the night. She notices the barn glowing faintly in the distance and determines to investigate it, thinking Brandon might be inside. When she enters the barn, she finds him standing over the trap doors, repeating a strange phrase under his breath. He is focused and agitated, tugging at the chains that keep the doors locked, and acts as if something is calling to him from below the trap doors. Tori calls his name a few times, but he doesn't seem to react to her voice. She gently reaches towards him, making him react finally, as startled and confused. Tori assumes that Brandon is sleepwalking and calms him down. Brandon mentions hearing some voices, but Tori brushes it off, as she tries not to scare him. She later puts him to bed and helps him sleep. Later, Kyle checks up on them and asks about what happened, but Tori keeps the incident to herself and explains that Brandon was sleepwalking. Next morning, Kyle opens up to Brandon about the first couple of years being challenging when they adopted Brandon, but explains that Candy had been very helpful in calming Brandon down and creating a connection between the two, turning into a special memory. As they sit together, the two quietly enjoy the candy together, sharing a brief moment of closeness. After a while, Kyle goes to do some yard work, leaving Brandon to himself. Brandon tries to start a lawnmower, but it doesn't work. He quickly grows frustrated, and in a moment of agitation, he throws the heavy machine across the yard with astonishing force. Stunned, he looks at his hands and realizes the power and strength he contains. He approaches the mower, which is now upside down on the ground with its sharp blades spinning. Brandon stares at it with strange whispers echoing in his head, pulling him into a trance-like state. Guided by the voices, he slams his hand down into the spinning blades, and the machine breaks instantly without harming Brandon. It becomes clear that something unexplained and potentially dangerous is awakening inside him. To celebrate Brandon's 12th birthday, the family gathers in a local diner. Tori's sister, Marilee, and her husband, Noah, also join the celebration. Marilee, who also happens to be Brandon's school counselor, applauds his intelligence and interest in academics. Noah presents Brandon with a hunting rifle as his birthday gift, gesturing it to be a traditional way of gifting, but Kyle quickly steps in and takes the gun away. He reminds everyone that Brandon is still a kid, which upsets Brandon, and he insists on keeping the gun. But Kyle stays adamant. Brandon slams the table with a fist, which causes the screens in the nearby arcade to flicker, which draws attention from other people in the diner. The moment turns into an intense one, and Kyle decides to end the birthday celebration early. Brandon refuses to get up and Kyle grabs his arm, which again results in the flickering of arcade screens. Tori steps in to calm the situation and gently convinces Brandon to leave. As the family steps out of the diner, a waitress named Erica watches them closely, clearly unsettled by what just happened. Back at home, Tori and Kyle sit down to talk about Brandon's unusual behavior, and Tori tries to stay positive, pointing out that teenagers act out impulsively, and they too did the same in their young age, and she is determined to support Brandon in this tumultuous age. Kyle agrees and suggests going camping together in Drivewood the next day. Next morning, as they prepare to go camping, Tori asks Brandon to grab his jacket, but he doesn't respond and stays focused on eating his breakfast. So Kyle comes towards him and notices something strange. Brandon is absent-mindedly chewing on his metal fork without any realization. Kyle takes it away, making Brandon snap out of it, and he is surprised to see the bent fork. Later, while packing, Tori goes to Brandon's bedroom to fetch his jacket and finds a bundle of papers under his bed. Curious, she shows them to Kyle, and they find some pictures of undressed women, which makes them uncomfortable. However, they brush it off as normal curiosity occurring at Brandon's age. But as they flip through the pages, disturbing and detailed images of human organs are seen mixed between the nude images. This makes Tori and Kyle uneasy, and they decide to discuss this with Brandon soon. While out hunting at the camping site, Kyle tries to make conversation with Brandon, focusing on growing up and relationships, explaining that intimacy isn't just physical, it's also about love and connection. He explains that it is normal to have strange urges in this age, and it's okay to explore them privately. Brandon fails to understand the logic behind the discussion, making it awkward, so Kyle quickly changes the topic. Meanwhile, Caitlin is suddenly woken in her bed by music playing from her laptop. She gets out of bed to close it, but when she goes back to bed, the music starts again. Feeling anxious, she again closes the laptop and notices some notes left on it. She senses someone outside her window and immediately calls her mother Erica. Her mother rushes in her room and Caitlin points towards the window, saying that someone is there. Erica checks the window but doesn't see anyone outside. She tries to calm Caitlin down and she realizes that the person outside her window is none other than Brandon. Back at home, Tori is worried and searches for Brandon in the woods. Suddenly, he appears behind and casually tells her that he went outside to use the bathroom. At school, Tori meets up with Marilee to talk about Brandon's behavior at his birthday party. Marilee responds by normalizing Brandon's behavior and mood swings due to his age, giving Tori some relief. Then, Tori catches Brandon drawing some strange symbols. As Brandon sees her, he quickly hides the drawings. That same night, Kyle notices a commotion created by chickens in his barn. Taking his gun, he goes to check the barn, expecting to find a wolf or a similar animal. Instead, he finds Brandon staring silently at the panicked chickens. Kyle tells Brandon that it's late and he should go back to bed. Next morning, Kyle discovers the chickens dead in their coop and shows it to Tori, explaining what he saw the other night. He argues that a wolf can't be responsible as the coop's lock is still intact, but Tori refuses to believe him that Brandon can be behind it. At school, during a trust-building exercise, Brandon forms a circle with his classmates. However, when Brandon's turn comes, Caitlin lets him fall to the ground, causing other students to laugh at him. Caitlin calls Brandon a pervert and refuses to help him up, but the coach steps in and urges Caitlin to help him, or else she will fail the class. When she finally extends her hand to Brandon, he angrily squeezes and crushes it. Later, parents of Caitlin and Brandon meet with the sheriff and school principal to discuss the matter. Erica is furious and demands that Brandon should be punished severely. However, she learns that only suspension and counseling would be the punishment, which makes her more upset. She also questions that Brandon's biological mother would have been unstable. Tori defends herself strongly, insisting that she's the true mother of Brandon, and it's very wrong to blame a child this way. She apologizes sincerely for Caitlin's injury and leaves the meeting. Back at home, Tori tells Kyle about the night when she saw Brandon in the barn, sleepwalking and trying to open the trap door. Kyle expresses his concern over the attachment Brayden displays towards the barn. He reminds Tori that Brandon is different from other kids and worries that he might cause serious harm to others. That night, Brandon understands the whispers that have been coming from the barn. He walks out of his room outside in the rain and heads towards the barn. Meanwhile, Tori searches the internet for the reasons behind Brandon's unexplained behavior and origins. When she notices the red light emanating from the barn, she rushes towards it and finds Brandon floating above the red light. Frightened, she tries to catch Brandon, but he falls down and cuts his hand from the spaceship hidden under the trap door. Tori rushes towards him to pacify, and Brandon asks her about what he really is, and Tori decides to tell him the truth about the spaceship. She explains her struggle to have kids and coming across the spaceship which contained Brandon, which causes him to pull away as he feels upset and betrayed for being lied to. He runs outside, hurt and despondent, and finally understands the whispers from the spaceship being "take the world." His eyes glow red and he screams. Brandon shows up uninvited at Caitlin's room, scaring her. He tries to make up with her by giving her flowers and tells her that she doesn't need to be afraid as she is one of the few people who know Brandon is different. Caitlin tells him that her mother has warned her not to talk to him, to which Brandon warns her that he will handle the situation himself. At the diner, Erica is cleaning up. She notices some strange symbols drawn on the windows. Thinking it to be a prank, she calls for Gary. Then, suddenly the lights flicker strangely. Just then, a window breaks and a piece of glass hits Erica's eyes. She manages to take it out, but blood starts dripping from her eye, and she struggles to see anything in the diner. Feeling scared and threatened, she grabs a baseball bat and swings it around to scare off whoever is trying to harm her. She then locks herself inside the freezer for safety, but a hot, glowing laser cuts through the freezer's metal door. Erica looks up and finds a boy in a mask and cape, with his eyes glowing bright red. Before she can react or get out, the boy attacks and kills her. Next morning, Tori and Kyle wait anxiously for Brandon at breakfast. When he arrives, they feel a sense of relief as he appears to be calmer and more accepting of his identity. Meanwhile, the sheriff investigates Erica's sudden disappearance and notices something strange on the windows. He carefully examines the symbol and realizes that it might be important and helpful in locating Erica. At a counseling session with Marilee, Brandon discusses the topic of adoption and learns that he has begun to see himself as a superior person to others. She presses him to express his feelings, especially about the lack of regret or remorse over the incident with Caitlin. She also makes clear that she is family, but she takes her role very seriously and will be reporting the discussion to the sheriff, which makes Brandon react angrily and visibly shaken. At a bar, Kyle talks with his friends about Erica's death. One friend hints at the involvement of Brandon due to his earlier violent incident with Caitlin, but quickly apologizes as Kyle rebukes him. Kyle also shares his fear that Brandon might be turning into something dangerous, but Noah tries to ease his mind by telling him that all children act out as monsters during puberty. Later, Marilee is alone at home when Brandon shows up and quietly threatens her to refrain from sending her report to the sheriff. But Marilee remains firm with her decision and asks him to leave. He steps away, but gives her a menacing and dangerous smile. Marilee then sends a text to her husband Noah before going to bed. Brandon watches her from the shadows in her room wearing his red mask. He plans to attack Marilee, but stops when he hears Noah approaching. Noah enters his bathroom and starts brushing his teeth, unaware that Brandon is watching him silently. Noah senses some movement in the closet and turns its light on, only to find Brandon in his mask. He then scolds him and takes him outside to his truck. Brandon warns him not to tell his parents, but Noah is unaffected. As Noah gets in the driver's seat, he finds the lights flickering, so he gets out to check up on Brandon in the back seat, but finds nothing. He tries to search for him and finds him in his mask. Then, Brandon attacks him with a blast of laser vision and disappears into the night. Noah is shaken and limps towards the car as he drives off, but after some distance, Brandon hits his car, causing him to lose control, and his car breaks down. As he tries to restart his car, the headlights flicker, revealing Brandon floating in front of his car. Noah becomes anxious, and Brandon lifts his car up in the air, then drops it forcefully on the ground. Noah dies by breaking his jaw on the steering wheel, and Brandon uses Noah's blood to draw the mysterious symbol on the road. Back at home, Kyle sits patiently and watches Tori making panicked calls to Marilee. Just then, Brandon walks in with his shirt in his hand, as if he's hiding something. Tori hugs him quickly and prompts him about what went down, but Brandon lies about being upset over a soccer game that led to bullying. However, both parents suspect him of not telling the truth. When Brandon retreats to his room, Tori and Kyle feel lost and unsure of how to help their alien son, as a specialist for his condition is not easy to find. Kyle blames himself and Tori for raising Brandon as a kid, even though Brandon is not human. At night, Kyle dreams of his past, and his mind takes him back to the woods where they first found Brandon in the spaceship. He sees Tori carrying a bleeding baby, and as she hands him the baby, he sees the image of a monster Brandon could become in the future. Suddenly, Kyle jolts awake as he receives Marilee's call, and Kyle and Tori rush to the hospital. They find Marilee upset because of Noah's fatal crash and try to comfort her. Marilee worries about Brandon and shocks Tori and Kyle when she discloses that Brandon visited her at night before the accident with Noah happened. Next morning, Tori and Kyle try to talk to Brandon and disclose the news about Noah's death, but Brandon remains calm and shows no concern over this news, which worries Tori and Kyle. Tori softly asks Brandon about knowing anything of the accident, but he lies and says he doesn't know anything. This makes Kyle lose his temper, and he is agitated that Brandon might have done something terrible. Kyle yells at Brandon for hiding something, and Brandon pushes him hard towards a cabinet, and it breaks. Tori steps in to stop the fight and asks Brandon to go to his room. He obliges and takes a shower while Kyle goes through his stuff in the bedroom. He finds a bloodstained shirt hidden, but then Brandon enters the room. Kyle quickly hides the shirt and acts like he's sorry for what went down in the kitchen. Kyle then shows the shirt to Tori and calls it evidence that proves that Brandon has done something unthinkable. But Tori refuses to believe him and chooses to ignore the shirt. This makes Kyle frustrated with anger, and he tells her that Brandon is not their son. Tori feels hurt hearing the harsh words from Kyle and storms out of the room. Meanwhile, the sheriff checks the evidence and photographs of the site of Noah's accident and notices the same symbol made on the road that he saw in the window of the diner and grows suspicious. Kyle goes through the childhood stuff of Brandon and remembers how much he adores and loves him as his child. Before going to bed, he tells Tori that he is planning to go camping with Brandon to fix their relationship. Next day, Brandon and Kyle leave for the woods with a quiet and tense journey with no words exchanged. At the same time, Sheriff visits Tori and inquires about Brandon and shows her a photo of the strange symbol found at the diner, as well as the accident site of Noah. He points that the symbol looks like two B's, meaning Brandon Breyer. Tori tries to act innocent and unaware, but the sheriff notices that she's hiding something from him. When Tori asks him to leave, he warns her that he'll be back soon. Then, Tori rushes to Brandon's room and finds his notebook filled with strange symbols, reminiscent of the ones presented by the sheriff. She also finds disturbing drawings depicting the deaths of Erica and Noah. Back in the woods, Kyle and Brandon walk quietly. Then, Kyle raises his gun behind Brandon and aims at him as he is distracted. A tear falls down from Kyle's eyes as he doesn't want to do this to his own son, but he still pulls the trigger and shoots him in his head. However, nothing happens to Brandon, shocking Kyle to his core. As Brandon looks at him with equal shock, Kyle quickly reloads his gun, but Brandon disappears before he can shoot again. Kyle tries to run away, but Brandon catches him and makes him beg for his life. For a moment, Brandon hesitates. However, he shoots Kyle with powerful lasers, killing him immediately. Then, Tori desperately calls Kyle's phone, but Brandon answers it, telling her coldly that Kyle is dead. Tori refuses to believe this piece of information and asks Brandon about his whereabouts. Brandon tells her that he's home and crushes Kyle's phone. Tori screams in fear as Brandon starts tearing their house apart. She quickly calls 911, but Brandon interrupts it before she can ask for help. Just then, the sheriff and his deputy reach the Breyer house and find it in ruins. When Tori rushes towards them, Brandon violently kills the sheriff. The deputy asks Tori to hide and calls for backup, but experiences interference in the radio. Brandon then appears behind her and mercilessly kills her, while Tori witnesses her death hidden under the bed. Brandon searches for Tori, but she stealthily comes out of the bed and climbs out of the window, but falls to the ground, hurting her hand. She remembers that Brandon was also hurt while he was floating above the spaceship during one of his sleepwalks. She quickly realizes what needs to be done and rushes towards the barn. As soon as she reaches it and opens the door, the ship starts to glow with an eerie and otherworldly red light, which reveals a horrifying sight of Erica's torn-apart body lying behind the ship. Shocked and terrified, Tori quickly grabs a sharp piece of metal from the spaceship and slips it into her back pocket. She calls out to Brandon using soft whistles, just the way they used to call each other while playing hide-and-seek, hoping to reach the good part inside Brandon's heart. For a moment, Brandon appears to be soft and innocent, melting into Tori's arms. But Tori takes out the metal piece from her back pocket and prepares to stab him from behind. Brandon senses the attack and stops her. With a feeling of betrayal, he launches Tori upward to the roof, which hits Tori's head severely and she bleeds profusely. Brandon takes her higher in the sky, and Toru tries to caress him gently, hoping to have a last gentle connection with him. However, Brandon drops her without any warning. Tori plunges down to her death, and Brandon watches her fall. He then looks up just in time to see an approaching plane. Next morning, the news breaks that an airplane crashed right into the Breyer house, wiping away all evidence of the brutal murders committed by Brandon last night. Among the wreckage, rescue workers find the strange symbols painted by Brandon on the plane. As the workers tend to him and supply him with some food, he eats it without showing any remorse for the actions that took place the night before. Sometime later, Brandon appears in various news channels, present during disasters happening across the world, and an online conspiracy theorist warns the public of the existence of superpowered beings like Brandon who will take over the world.